For this lesson, we're going to talk about how people can use what's a percent in budgeting. When you're doing a budget, there's a lot of different ways to set it up, and it's all just a personal preference and what you prefer and how you want your budget to be set up. Sometimes people set their budgets up starting with the percent-based budget, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. So at the top of your paper, you have a couple paragraphs that you can look through, but just like I was just saying, if we just read what it has up here, it says one way to start a budget is using percentages. Sometimes budget percents are popular because they give you an idea of what your budget should look like based on the average person's finances. But the budget percentage system isn't perfect. It can give you a starting point, but you'll need to adjust your budget based on your own wants and needs. So there's kind of, you could look up online like averages people spend for housing or groceries or gas, and then you could use that to kind of get you started. But it's not going to be exactly what you spend. And so it will help you get started, but you still need to make adjustments based on what you're actually spending for yourself. So let's go to this first example and I'll kind of show you how the averages or how the percents work in budgets. This one has, at the top it says you've got Carol, she's a nurse and she's got a family of two, and then it has her salary and her taxes. So it says that her annual salary, remember annual means that's how much she makes in a year. And then it shows that she has an 18% tax rate. So we're just saying all of her taxes, she pays 18%. Then you have over here, we've got this will that has a bunch of percents on it. We're going to make a budget based on the percents in that will. So you can see, like if we just look at specifically housing right here is 30%, transportation's 11%, food is 20%, and so on around that will. So I'm going to show you how that's going to come into play in just a minute. But we first need to find these things. We need to find her amount of taxes, this right here. We need to figure out her net annual income, and we need to figure out her net monthly income. So those are the three we're going to do. So let's do them in this order. And you could even write this on your paper so you remember this comes first, then you find this, and then you're going to find the net monthly income. So that's the order you're going to find these in. So the taxes, then the net annual, then the net monthly. So first thing we're going to do is figure out how much tax she pays for the year. We have 18% tax rate. So if she pays 18% in taxes, we're going to times that by her income to know how much she's going to pay. But anytime we have a percent, we've got to change it to a decimal by either dividing by 100 or moving your decimal two places. So I'm going to start by just taking 18%, dividing it by 100, or just moving your decimal two places, which gives me 0.18. Then I can times that by the amount of money she makes. So times that by $32,880. So go ahead and type that in your calculator, and that's going to give you her tax amount. Okay, so if I type that in, I get $5,918.40. So that is the answer to number one, the amount of taxes she's going to have to pay. Then we need to find the net annual income. So finding the net annual income, that's just how much net means after she pays taxes. So once we get that number, that tax number, we're going to take the annual income and subtract the taxes. That's going to give us the answer that goes here. So we're subtracting those two numbers to get the net annual income. So if you want to write that in your notes, you might have to write kind of small, or maybe have it be two lines if you need to. This would be 32,880 minus 5918, or yeah, 59, I need to write that better, 5918.40. Subtract those, and that's going to give you this net income. And you're not going to, if you, on your notes, I would at least write that down on one problem. You might need to write kind of small to have this all fit. So that's in there. And then I'm going to erase it on mine just so I can write the number bigger, but leave that on your paper. Just write it a little bit smaller up top. So this number gives you $26,961.60. So that's our net annual income. Then we need to find the monthly income. So if we know that's how much we make in a year, If we want to find monthly, if you remember, we did monthly, there's 12 months in a year. So we just take the annual income and divide it by 12. So I'm going to take 26,961.60 and divide that by 12 to get my monthly income. So that's going to give me $2,246.80. This number is really important for the rest of the question, for all the rest of the things. If you get that number wrong, everything on the rest of this problem is going to be wrong, every number you find. So it's very important that you get that number right. So as you're doing this, if you want us to check, ask and I will check that number before you move on, because if you get that number wrong, you're going to mess everything else up. So it's really, really important that you have that number right. Once you get that number, then we're going to figure out our budget by multiplying that number by all of these down here in the table. We're going to multiply our income by each one of those percents. We're going to change all those percents to decimals, multiply the income by the percents. That's what's going to help us fill out this budget column. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So first thing I'm going to do is take each of these numbers, I'm going to divide them all by 100, and we're going to put them over in the categories that they belong to. So housing, if I do, so what I'm doing, just so you can see, I'm doing 30 divided by 100, and then I'm going to write the answer over by housing. So that gives me 0.3. And then I'm going to do transportation. So I do 11 divided by 100, which gives me 0.11. And then food, I do 20 divided by 100, which gives me 0.2. And savings, do 10 divided by 100, which gives me 0.1. Same thing with clothing. So 5 divided by 100 gives me 0.05. Gifts and entertainment, 12 divided by 100 gives me 0.12. Miscellaneous is 7, so divide that by 100, I get 0.07. And then debt is 5%, so that's going to give me 0.05. Then I'm going to take each of those numbers and multiply them by the net monthly income. So I would take 0.3, and I'm going to times this by 2246.80. Then I'm going to multiply the next one by 2246.80. And multiply the next one by 2246.80. So you're just doing this all the way down, multiplying each one of these by 2640 or 2246.80 all the way down. So I want you to write this, all the work, at least on one of them. So if you forget, you can look back and see what you did. On the other ones, it's okay if you skip writing every single thing down. But I do want you to write it at least on this one. So if you forget, you know what you did. So you might need to write kind of small to be able to fit it, but I want you to write down what you did to get these numbers. Even if you just wrote yourself a note of where you got it, that would be fine too. So we're going to multiply those all together, and then we're going to write our numbers out. So the first one, I get 674.04. For transportation, I get 247.0 or 0.15. Just round correctly on these also. Then I get food is 449.36. And then I have savings at 224.68. And close at 112.34. And gifts and entertainment, 269.62. And then I have 157.28. And my last one, I get 112.34. So you can see how having the net monthly income is very important, that you have the right number. If not, all of those will be wrong. Now we need to find our variance, and that's what we did in the last lesson. You're just subtracting each of these numbers. You just do budget minus actual. So budget minus actual. So if you subtract each one of those all the way down, that's going to give you the variance. So go ahead and subtract those, and then I'll give you what I got for all of those. So for the first one, I got negative, so make sure you put a negative in there, 75.96. Then I got positive 47.15. Remember, positive is good. Then I got 24.36 and 24.68. And then I got a negative 87.66. And I got a negative 30.38 and 57.28 and negative 37.66. All right, so there's all of our numbers. So that takes a little bit to get all those. You've got to be extra careful. It's really easy to make mistakes on this. So just be extra careful entering stuff and let us check your answers as you go to see what you've got to make sure you're doing it right. Okay, so now let's answer the questions. So A says, what is the total of the variance column? So to get the total, all you're going to do is add these all up. Make sure you keep the positive is positive and the negative is negative. So you're going to add those all up and you're going to get a total. So when I add those, I get a negative 78.19. That's my variance column. So let's write that on part A. So negative $78.19. So part B says, what does the total of the variance column represent? Well, if you add the variance column together, that gives you what your ending balance is going to be. If I were to add my budget numbers, so if I added all of these up and I got a total down here, and if I added my actual and I subtracted these two, that would give me my ending balance, which is the variance. So if I subtracted those numbers, I would get the variance. So the variance is the ending balance, or the total of the variance is her ending balance. So that's her total. So that tells you if she was over or under her budget. So part C says, how well is she following her overall budget? So we would normally want to look at every single category and make adjustments within the categories. But for this question, we just want to know her overall budget, how's she doing? So if we just looked at this number only, ignore everything else for just a minute and just look at that number or her ending balance, we want to know how well she's following her budget. We want that variance to be as close to zero as possible. This is called zero balance budgeting, where we want everything to be zero. We want our budget and our actual to match the best that we can. And people call this zero balance budgeting. So if we want that number to be as close to zero as possible, the farther from zero it is, the worse it is. And if it's negative, it's even worse. So if she's negative 78, that means she spent too much money. And the more negative it is, the worse it is. So negative 78 is not terrible, but it's not good at all. If she did that every month, she would be spending $78 more than she had every month and she'd be getting herself in a big hole if she was doing that one month over month. So how well is she following it? I would say not very well. She is over budget by $78.19. So I'm just giving a reason of why I don't think she's doing very well. So I want you to write kind of, is she doing good and why or why not? So she needs to make some adjustments to get her budget closer to zero. All right, so let's try another one of those. So the table, filling this out is what takes the very longest and it's easy to make mistakes. So just be extra careful. So DeAndre is an entrepreneur, family of four. They have a $65,000 annual salary and a 28% tax rate. So again, remember we're doing the tax amount, the net amount, and then we do this net monthly income over here. So to find our taxes, take the 28 divided by 100. So I get 0.28. Then I multiply that by my annual salary. So multiply that by $65,000. And that's going to give me my tax amount. So this tax amount is $18,200. Okay, so there's our first answer. Now I want to do the net annual income. So I'm going to take the annual salary and subtract my taxes. So if I take taxes out, net is what's left over after I remove taxes. So those two numbers I have highlighted, I'm subtracting 65,000 minus 18,200. So that gives me $46,800. And make sure you're doing this in your calculators also, just so you can see how I'm getting these answers. Then we have our net monthly income. So we want to change it to monthly. So I'm going to divide that number by 12. So I'm going to take 46,800 and divide it by 12. So that gives me $3,900. Again, that number is very, very important that you have it correct, because that number is what we're going to use to multiply by each of these percents. So this one's a little shorter because it has a couple less, but it's still going to take us a minute. So we're going to take each of those percents times by 3,900. That's going to give us our budget. So first thing I'm going to do is divide these each by 100. So I'm going to take 30, divide it by 100. So that gives me 0.3. So then groceries, 20 divided by 100 gives me 0.2. Transportation, 15 divided by 100 is 0.15. Debt is the same, so 0.15. Savings is 10 and church is 10, so they're both 0.1. And really, if we do one of those, we know both the 0.15 and the 0.1 are going to, the two that are 0.15 are going to match each other. So then we take 3,900 and we're going to times each one of these by 3,900. So we're timesing this by 3,900 all the way down. And again, if you can do this in your calculator without writing it, as long as you have it written down somewhere so that if you forget, you can look back at it. You don't have to write it on every single problem. Just write it at least on one so you can go back and look at it if you forget. So I'm going to give you all these numbers. So I have $1,170. Groceries is $780. Transportation is $585. And debt's going to be the same because it's the same percent. And savings is $390, which is going to be the same for church because it is also the same. So really what we're doing is we just made a budget, and in real life, you would have made this budget, then you would have kept track of your expenses, and that's where this column comes from. This would be what did you actually spend? Then we're comparing the budget and the actual to see if the budget actually fits what we're spending or if we need to make some adjustments. And most of the time, if you're doing a percent base, you're going to need to make some adjustments. So now we're going to subtract these all the way down to get the new variance, or to figure out what our variance is. So the first one, if we subtract, I get negative $30. Second one, I get negative 170. And then 95 and 0, which 0 is the best because that means we were right on budget. And then 105 and another 0. All right, so we had a couple zeros in there, which is good, but we have a couple that are quite over or quite under our budget. So we would need to make some adjustments, but let's answer some questions based on that. So we have our whole table filled out. So part A says, what is the total of the variance column? So we're going to go up, we're going to take this variance column, add all of these together. Remember to keep the negatives negative as you're adding these up. So if I add all of those, I actually get $0. And this, remember, is my ending balance. That's what's left over. If I add the variance column, it gives me my ending balance. So let's go over to part A and see what it says. So what is the total of the variance column? Well, it is just $0. Part B says, what does the total of the variance column represent? It represents the ending balance. What do they have left? How much money do they have left? How much did they overspend or underspend? That's what that column means, or what the variance sum means. Part C says, how well is she following her overall budget? So we're not going to look at individual categories. If we just look at this number, ignore the variance numbers we have some that are high and low. I'm going to ignore all of them. And if I just wanted to look at my overall budget and I want to know, did she follow her budget? Or how well did she follow it? So this one means that her budget is perfect, essentially, with her overall budget. So her overall budget is perfect because her ending balance is 0. So if you look at the overall budget, she did really good because she's right at 0, which is where we want with this type of budgeting, we're looking at zero balance budgeting where we have no money left. We've accounted for all of our money. Some of it was in savings, so we'll have money left, but we accounted for every penny. Now we would need to make some adjustments still because we want all of these numbers to be 0. So we would need to add some money to some places, subtract from other places so that all of the numbers are 0. But in the end, the ending balance is the most important, of course, because we want that to be as close to 0 as possible along with each of the variances. And that's all we have for that one. Okay, so one more. We'll go through this one kind of quickly. So we have $92,000 is the annual salary, and we have a 34% tax rate. So first, we're going to multiply those two together. So we take 34 and divide it by 100 and then times it by 92,880. So I'm going to just go ahead and give you that answer. So we have $31,579.20. Then we need to subtract that from the income. So 92,000 minus the 31. So we're subtracting these two numbers that I have highlighted in yellow. Those are the two I'm subtracting. So that gives me a net income of $61,300.80. Then we need to find the monthly income. So take that number, divide it by 12. If I divide that by 12, I get $5,108.40. Okay, so there's my income. That number is very important. It has to be correct. So now I'm going to get all my percents. So I'm going to start with housing. So we're going to take 35, divide it by 100. I get 0.35. Debt, 15 divided by 100 is 0.15. My savings, the same thing, so 0.15. Groceries is 10%, which is 0.1. Church is the same, 0.1. And transportation is the same, which is 0.1. And then things she wants, 5 divided by 100, so 0.05. So now multiply each of those numbers. So we're going to times all these numbers by 5108.40. So multiply those all together. So the first one I get 1787.94. And debt and savings are going to be the same because they have the same percent. So 766.26 on both of those. Then we're going to have the next three. They're the same because they're all 10% or 0.1. So they're all 510.84. That made this a little bit faster because we had some that were the same. And then the very last one was 255.42. Okay, then we have to find our variance. So we're going to subtract. So I get negative $12.06. Then I get a positive 266.26, which that's a big positive number. Positive numbers are good, but we actually want it to be closer to 0. So even though it's positive, we would need to make some adjustments because we want that number to be as close to 0 as possible. So then I get 66.26, negative 49.16, and then we get 15.84, and 60.84, and then negative 69.58. All right, so there's all of our numbers. So make sure if you need to pause it to write all those down, then do it. And then we'll go ahead and answer questions. So part A says, what is the total of the variance column? So same thing we've done on the last two, add up these numbers, keep positives positive, negatives negative. So that gives me a negative 69. I'm sorry, not negative 69. It's a positive number, positive 278.40. So that's my answer for part A. What's the total of the variance column? $278.40. And what does that total represent? What does the total of the variance column? It represents our ending balance. And how well is she following her overall budget? Again, we're just looking overall. We would, if this was a real budget, we would want to look at every category individually and move money around within the categories. But for this question, we just want to look at the overall number. So this is kind of a tricky question because it's good that she has money left over. She has extra money. She didn't spend too much. That's really a good thing. But for this type of budgeting, we want to get it as close to zero as possible, which means she needs to make some adjustments in her budget and put more money into savings, maybe make an emergency fund, do something that she is going to have, put that money somewhere. So it's not just like, oh, I have extra money and you blow it on whatever you want. It's good to have every penny accounted for so that you have a spot for all the money, whether it's putting into savings, emergency fund, retirement, whatever it is. You want to have a spot for all of your money. It's not that you're spending all of it, it's that you are accounting for all of it and you have it in a certain category. And this money was just leftover money. So I would say it is good that she has leftover money or has money left over. Or you could say it's good that she is under her budget. But the ending balance needs to be closer to zero. So make sure in your on your assignment when they ask this kind of question that you're being specific, like I have in these. Why is it good? Why is it bad? What changes need to be made? Things like that as you're answering that last question.